It's ready. One second.
Whoop, I'm ready.
Just kidding.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and good evening. Thank you all for being here at the Committee on Ordinance. Today is Wednesday, October 18th. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Madam Clerk, and your assistant. I'd like to recognize wonderful Christine Johnson of Policy Office and Mr. Aaron Garner. Thank you for being here and for the work you do. And along with our Department of Law Department. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
Good evening. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Chairman Espinal,
Present.
Vice Chairwoman Peterson,
Present.
Councilwoman Harris,
Present.
Councilman Vargas,
Present.
Councilor Royce is absent, therefore present and when absent, we have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Madam Clerk, I'd like to take an item on order, number 2. Thank you so much. And that item right there, I will entertain a motion to continue. I have a few questions about that, and I'll be working with the law department to try to get answers to that. So some clarity. I'll entertain a motion to continue,
So moved.
which has been made.
Second.
And second, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Yes, I have a motion to continue. Okay, Madam Clerk, item number 1, please.
An ordinance and amendment of chapter 27 of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Providence entitled the City of Providence Zoning Ordinance. Approved November 24th, 2014, as amended to change certain text in articles 2, 4, 6, 12, 17, 18, 19, and 20. The following has been invited for presentation. Robert Azar, Deputy Director, Department of Planning and Development.
Thank you so much. So the Department of Planning and Development and the zoning officials, they have to be in this package in order to meet certain laws that were passed by the General Assembly, and we have a deadline of January 1st. So in order to get us to understand all this, and so that we can begin to do our duties, we've invited Mr. Azar from the Department of Planning. We will fully explain everything that's in front of us. Mr. Azar, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm glad to be here in this setting. I think it's a good opportunity to kind of informally talk about these things outside of the formality of the public hearing. So thank you for making the time for me to do that.
Thank you.
As usual, I am going to try and take a topic that is sometimes very complicated, sometimes arcane, and communicate it to you as best I can in plain English so that you understand what we're doing. If at any time you have any questions about what I'm saying, please don't hesitate to interrupt me and ask. What I'm going to do is just give an introduction, and then I'll run through a slide presentation that I hope will help you understand what's happening here. The General Assembly.
So, excuse me, Mr. Azar. So, Madam Clerk, this will be a PowerPoint presentation.
That's right.
So, I think we must enter this as an exhibit. So, I'll entertain a motion to enter the PowerPoint presentation as exhibit A.
So moved.
Motion is
Second.
made and second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? You guys have it. Now becomes part of the record. Thank you, Mr. Azar.
Do you want to enter the memo as an exhibit as well?
Yes, we will. So, I'll entertain a motion to enter the memo here as exhibit B.
So moved.
Motion is
Second.
made and second, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Yes, have it. Exhibit B is now as part of the record. Thank you. Continue, Mr. Azar, please.
So the Rhode Island General Assembly is the Rhode Island General Assembly made some amendments at the end of last session, this was in June, to the Zoning Enabling Act and the Subdivision Enabling Act. They passed, I believe it was 12 different laws. And they all are intended to apply to every community in the state. And they mandate that we update our zoning ordinance in a way that will produce more consistent outcomes in the review of development projects. Fortunately, I would argue that we had made a lot of changes in our zoning ordinance that sort of anticipated where the General Assembly was going, such that only 4 of those laws apply to us in Providence. So there are a number of other bills that passed that relate to affordable housing production. These are for communities that don't meet the 10% threshold. So we do not have to amend our ordinance to comply with those laws, but we do with these other things. So there's a lot of different ways to sort of explain what's going on here. The memo sort of explains it by walking through each of the articles that are being proposed for amendment. But I think this presentation hopefully will give you a little bit better sense of how this all works together. I want to add that there are 2 other state laws that are influencing the amendments, one of which passed in the 2022 General Assembly session related to accessory dwelling units. And then there's another law relating to family daycare homes that I'll talk about. There's an inconsistency between the way zoning and a separate state law look at family daycare homes. So we wanted to reconcile that difference. And I'll get into that momentarily. So Madam Clerk, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. I will just give this overview here. I just talked about this. We have proposed changes to the text of the ordinance. These are to comply with state laws regarding planning and zoning, to comply with recently amended state laws, and critically, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, these amendments are required to be in place prior to January 1st, 2024. Every one of these amendments that have been passed at the state law, the very last sentence is these laws take effect January 1st, 2024. So they give us a very short timeline. I'm grateful that we have capable staff in the planning department, the zoning office, and in the law department. They've all been great partners in assisting with this, so I want to give credit to that. So in terms of the timeline, these were reviewed by the City Planning Commission in September. They were introduced to the council on October 5th. Here we are at this presentation on the 18th. There's a public hearing that's being advertised to happen on the 1st, and we're hoping if all goes well, we'll see first passage mid-November, second passage early December, and then approval by the full council and signature by the mayor prior to January 1st. Okay, so the next slide. All right, now this is where I'm going to get into the sort of wonky language coming back, and I'm going to describe how this applies to my local ordinance. Substandard lots of record are lots that are smaller than what zoning requires. So to give you an example, in an R2 or an R3 zone, very common zoning, residential zoning districts that we have in Providence, there's a requirement that lots have to have 5,000 square feet. Okay, as most of you surely know, we have thousands of lots that are smaller than that. Those are what we call substandard lots of record. They were established at a time when it was legal to make lots that small. These days, it's no longer legal, but small lots have protection under the law. They can still be developed. We have had for years rules about how small lots can be developed. The state is now stepping in and mandating that we have even more rules about it. first of all, so what you'll see here, this is, this language in blue that's underlined, this is right out of the amendment. I'm just excerpting it here for you. It says, what it says in plain language is that if we allow a use in a zone, the fact that the lot is substandard does not allow us to be stricter about what that use can be. So, an example, if you have a 4,000 square foot lot in a three-family zone, you can still have 3 units on that lot. And that's state law, that is what they are imposing on us. We think that there are ways to kind of mitigate against that I'll get into a little bit, but that is essentially what they're saying. This is a way of saying to communities, if you have small lots, you still need to allow them to be developed. We have done, like I said, we've done this all along, but the state is now being more prescriptive about how we have to do it. Furthermore, they're saying that as lots get smaller, we need to adjust our setbacks and lot coverage requirements accordingly. Again, we've already done this for years. The state is telling us that we have to do a little bit different. So I think this will not affect us too terribly much, but it just is more about the way we have to write the law. Okay, I'll just move on to the next one unless anybody has any questions.
So basically, Mr. Azar, we're going by the area zoning rather than the square footage.
That's right.
And then you'll adapt the construction, the property accordingly to meet.
That's right. Yes, you have it precisely. So as the lot gets smaller, there are still other requirements that kick in that the law doesn't affect. For example, on very small lots, we actually have a reduced height, and we still have requirements with respect to pervious versus impervious surface. So as a practical matter, even if lot coverage is allowed to get more, there are some other safeguards that will prevent, in my opinion, overbuilding of the lot. But what's clear is that if we have a zone that allows for a certain number of units, we have to figure out a way to allow that on the parcel. And we have we've adjusted certain of our dimensional requirements in a way that I think will provide safeguards.
But I don't. So I should anticipate to see a typical Providence 3-family double parlor 3 bedrooms being built in a 3,000 square feet. Because you still got to allow for the parking.
It's going to be tricky. Yeah, as the lot gets smaller, there's a lot you have to do. You still have to landscape, you still have to provide parking, you still have limits on how much pavement you can have on the lot. So as a practical matter, while we do have to accommodate more units, chances are these are going to be smaller units.
Exactly. So the typical 2 bedroom instead of 3, 1 parlor instead of
Could be
2,
something like that.
with a reduction in size.
That's right. That's right.
Councilman Peterson.
You kind of, thank you. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And you kind of touched on this. My concern is parking.
Yes.
With these smaller square footages, we already have an issue with parking. Rents are getting more expensive. People are getting roommates. Everybody's bringing a car. My concern is, are we going to be adjusting, or should we consider adjusting our parking requirements and things with that kind of to go in tune with this particular change to the ordinance?
We haven't proposed any parking changes. What we say today is that in most zones for residential, we require 1 parking space per dwelling unit off-site. Now, you know, if there are always consequences to changing a regulation like this. If we were to increase it, then that would mean that more of the lot would have to be dedicated to parking. And at some point, something's got to give. You allow for more impervious surface to accommodate parking. We don't want that because impervious surface is not good.
Right.
We have a lot of it in the urban environment. It has, you know, heat island effects, it has stormwater runoff effects, and aesthetic effects. You know, what we want to see is a balance on the lot. So that's where we come down with this one parking space. Obviously, the street is available for parking. Some streets are better able to handle it than others. There's always going to be an uneasy balance. You know, regrettably, you know, cars in the city cause congestion and parking issues. I don't know if there's any perfect solution to that.
Just as a follow-up,
Sure.
I just, thinking ahead, I think one of the things that we're gonna have to look at is parking, not necessarily, I agree with you, it's. City life kind of. Moves us into a certain direction, but as we consider multimodal options and, also what that does to I just wanna make sure that we're also considering what happens with our overnight parking permits and things like that, because. In many neighborhoods, we're starting to see that abundance of cars is becoming a little bit more troublesome than we were anticipating. So,
Well, yeah, and I agree with you, and I'm aware, very acutely aware of places where it's challenging. And you know, some of the things that you're talking about, I think will relate well to the comprehensive planning process that we're going through. That will down the line inform further changes to the zoning ordinance. What we tried to do with this package is to keep it focused on what the state is mandating. There's always a temptation to kind of go in and tweak little things that we know we need to deal with. And we can come in from time to time with sort of fine tunings to the zoning ordinance. But I didn't want there. I recognize that because we have to do this, I tried to create something that didn't have too much friction, where it could get hung up. But you know, to your point, everything we touch has, you know, first and second order consequences, and it's very hard to make any changes without you know, having ramifications, some of which we may not know about until later, because as much as we try to anticipate what zoning is going to produce, the creativity of the developers out there is unbounded, and sometimes they come up with interpretations that we never considered, and so it's a bit of a game of trying to build the best mousetrap we can and tweaking it as we go.
thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Peterson, Councilman Vargas, please.
The question I have is, let's say like we have a street with all one family houses, 20 family, but in the middle of the street is a little lot. And a developer will come and he wants to put a 3-family house, right in the middle, look like a candle. These ordinance will allow him to do that?
If it's a 3-family zone. If what you're talking about, if it's all single-family houses and it's in a single-family zone, then the only thing that's allowed on that vacant parcel is a single family.
Okay. Right, that was.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right.
And.
Yes.
Second one. For parking issue, why we don't raise the property and have parking underneath?
Well, we allow that. We allow that, and we do see that built sometimes in residential zones. We see developers build sort of, what we call integral garages, where you can maybe have 2 doors with 1 car each, or maybe 2 cars each. We allow that. It's possible you end up with sometimes a very wide curb cut that isn't the best thing for pedestrians, a little bit of a trade-off there. What we understand is from, discussions with developers is that whenever you are building parking into a structure, it's very expensive, much more expensive than just paving the land. So, there are we don't see an awful lot of parking structures for that reason, especially with commercial buildings where it can cost upwards of, the last number I heard was $40,000 to $50,000 for every 1 parking space.
Hey, they're not gonna do it.
And so, these days of inflation, I'm sure that number's higher.
Thank you.
Okay.
Go right ahead, Mr. Azar.
Okay, next slide. This I think is a good one. There's a lot that the state did that we feel very good about, and this is one where we consider this to be very important. I want to give you a little bit of a description of nonconformity, which we've already talked about. That's something like a substandard law of record is what we call a nonconformity. That's something that was allowed at one point, but changes in the law have made it not allowed. Nonconformities are allowed to continue indefinitely. A good example of that is billboards. We don't allow billboards anymore, which is off-site advertising. We don't allow off-site advertising anymore. Everything that's been established legally is considered non-conforming, legal non-conforming, otherwise known as grandfather. Now, there's another way there are actually a couple other ways to do something with your property that's not allowed. One is you get a variance from the zoning board. The zoning board has a process where they allow you to deviate from the regulations of the ordinance. You have to demonstrate that you suffer a hardship, and we can prove that. Of course, a third way that something can exist when it's not allowed is it's done illegally. We're not talking about that, but we're talking about the difference between nonconformity and by variance. When something is nonconforming, state law has always provided ways that those things can be changed. And we have rules in our ordinance that say if you're nonconforming and you want to change that nonconformity, you can go through a process. Sometimes it's through the zoning board to change that. But for uses by variance, that's never been available to us. Once you get a use variance, up until now, that becomes the zoning for the property, and it can never be changed. It runs with the land forever. So if, for example, there is an auto body in the middle of a residential district, and that auto body was allowed by variance, we can never make it go away. And even if the owner wanted to change it to something less intense, they can't do it without going back to the zoning board and getting another use variance, which is something that the zoning board is unlikely to grant. Because use variances have a very high standard. They used to grant them all the time, they don't do it anymore. You have to demonstrate to the zoning board that if you don't get this use variance, your property has lost all beneficial use, which is a standard that's virtually impossible to withstand. That's one of the reasons why we see so many zoning changes these days. But what the law says now is that we can change use variances. We're enabled to do that. So what we're proposing is standards that look very much like what we have for non-conforming uses. So if somebody wanted to take that auto body that was allowed by variance and they wanted to convert it to a residential use, for example, we've created a process now where they can do that. They'll still have to go to the zoning board. They'll still have to demonstrate that the use they're proposing is less intensive than what was allowed by variance. But at least there's a path to do it, and we think that this is positive. There's a path away from some of these legacy uses that I think are detrimental in the community. Okay, so that's that one. The next one is very simple. These are the standards for variances. When the zoning board considers the application for a variance, they have to make certain findings. And the General Assembly has amended those findings, and we are obliged to simply repeat these verbatim in our zoning ordinance. So we've struck some language, and we've added some language. What this is going to mean, how much easier it is to get a variance or harder, I can't say at this point. I think that's going to have to be tested over time. But what this is going to mean is that there's going to be a whole new body of case law about how variances get granted and what someone wants to do. I think we'll have to see, but we're just doing this. They tell us this is the language and this is what's going to be important. Likewise, special use permits. Quick primer on special use permit. In our zoning ordinance, we have uses that are allowed, we have uses that are not allowed. That's simple, yes or no. Somewhere in the middle is the special use permit. What a special use permit is it's a use that's allowed, but you have to meet certain criteria, and you have to go to the zoning board and you have to show that you've met those criteria. What the state law now says is that if you say something is allowed by special use permit, it must have criteria. If it doesn't, you have to allow it by right. So you can't just.
Repeat that.
Okay, so what they're saying is that special use permits must have criteria. And if you don't have criteria attached to those special use permits, then you have to allow it by right. So I can give you an example in the document. We had a bunch of these. So we had to go through and we had to change it. So let's give you an example. So in some cases, golf course / driving range, it was allowed by special use permit. You can see this is on page 6 of the ordinance. I know there have been some issues with formatting, so it might be a different page.
It would be
table
28.
Table 12 12. It's table 12-1. It should look like it should be a table that says across the top table 12-1 use matrix. You see that? Okay. Okay. So if you look down that table at golf course driving range, you'll see that there were S's in the column corresponding with R1A through R4, and also in MMU.
They got striked out.
We struck those out because, first of all, nobody's going to build a golf course or a driving range in the residential zone, and even if they wanted to, we don't think that's a great idea because it takes up way too much land that should be used for housing. And besides, if you look at the very last column that says use standard, we didn't have any special criteria for golf course or driving range. So if we had left those S's in there, the new state law would have said that's the equivalent of making a P permitted. So what we decided to do was just revise this and say it's not allowed in the residential zones, and it's going to be allowed by right in the public space zone and the open space zone. Those are municipal zones. Those are for like schools and other public facilities and parks. So we just said, if the Parks Department wants to establish a driving range or a golf course in a park, they can do it, they don't have to go to the zoning. Okay, so that's an example there. Another example, rehabilitation center, if you go further down, we're keeping this as special use permit in C2, C3, and W2, but we've now added criteria. Section 1202X, which is going to be on the next page. We've added rehabilitation center to X, and we've now put in criteria so that when you go to the zoning board, you have to demonstrate that you meet these standards before you can get into special use permit. So that's the exercise we went through with all of the special use permits in the ordinance. We either decided, let's not allow them, let's allow them by right without special criteria, or let's add special use permit criteria if we're going to keep them as a special use. Any further questions on that? I know this is a lot, but and I'm always happy to talk about.
These are the, I'm sorry.
I don't plan to build an airport.
Councilor Vargas, you got a question? No.
No, I saw the heliport.
Teleport, yeah.
That would be for you.
Jesus.
Yeah. I'm looking at the rehabilitation center, you said an example. So this is the changes that the state themselves have already made. And they're asking us to make the same to match them.
So that's a good question. So the where rehabilitation center is allowed is up to us.
It's up to the city.
It's up to the city, and the process by which it's allowed is also up to the city. What the state is saying is that if you have an S in any one of those columns, you have to have criteria. Okay, so that's what that's about. We didn't change with respect to rehabilitation center. We're not proposing to change where it's allowed, or even in this particular case, where it's allowed by right or by special use permit. We're just making sure that we have criteria that can be reviewed by the zoning board when it's allowed by special use permit.
Thank you.
Okay.
That makes sense.
All right, Mr. Davis.
Okay. Next. Okay, this is an interesting one. There's something called modification. And this is a process where the zoning official has the ability to grant minor variances without going to the zoning board. And the law has always said that we can have this, but we don't have to. Now the law is saying that we have to have it. Well, we've had it all along. But what we say in our ordinance is that the zoning official is allowed to grant up to 10% of any dimensional standard. So for example, if there's a 10-foot setback, the zoning official could alter that by 10% or 1 foot. Okay, if there's a 40-foot height limit, the zoning officer could modify that by up to 4 feet. And there's a process. The zoning officer has to place an ad in the paper and has to send a notice to direct the butters. If anybody objects, it immediately goes to the zoning board and gets reviewed as a variance. But if nobody objects within 30 days, the modification is granted. Okay, that's already in place. We've been doing that for years. It works very nicely to give a little bit of flexibility. Now, what the state is saying, first of all, is that communities have to do this. That's fine, we're already doing it. But they also say that up to 15%. We have to allow for up to 15%. So we've got to bump up from 10% to 15%. All right. So for example, if the height is 40 feet, 10% is 4 feet, 15% is 6 feet. So we've got to allow a little bit more by modification. That objection process still holds. If the direct abutter objects, it still goes to the zoning. Okay. Yes.
Yes, sir. Councilman Vargas?
Thank you. So if you have a property right here, and you want to extend the property, but you have 12 square feet to the back. So you take 15% out of that one.
So let's say what we say today is that your rear yard setback is 25 feet. That's the required rear yard setback. If you already have less than that, you're considered to be non-conforming, and you can't go any further by modification. But if you're at 25 and you want to go a little bit into that, if you take 25 and multiply it by 15%, now that's going to be 2.5 plus 1.75. So you could go like an extra four and change feet where by modification through this administrative process.
That's 3.75.
3.7. I'm not, as an engineer.
That was really.
Well, we're really close.
But my ability to do math in my head is decreased with my age.
So if you want to go further, you have to go to zoning.
That's right. Anything above a modification, you go to zoning and you have to.
Then blueprints and all that.
Yes, that's right.
But it also says is that these are, I'm sorry, Councilman, just to be quick, that you can go up to 25%.
Yeah, we have decided that we don't want to allow our zoning official to have that kind of power. 25% is a lot. In a 3-story building,
Yeah.
25% is one more story.
Exactly.
So we, frankly, we were fine with 10%, the state's mandating 15, we can live with 15. Anything more than that, I think is too much for an administrative officer to grant.
Thank you. Councilman Peterson,
I
please.
didn't have anything to say. I was actually just gonna refer to that but you guys answered it.
Okay. Next is adaptive reuse. Okay, this is interesting. So basically what this is saying is that if you have a building in a residential zone that was built as a commercial building or a religious facility, a church or a rectory, or a school, or a medical building, or even a mall, they even say, it can be converted to residential development by right. Okay, and you can't limit the number of units by the zone. So for example, we have large schools in single family zones.
Yes.
If someone wanted to convert that into a residential building today, they'd be limited to 1 unit. Some of these schools have 10,000, 20,000, 40,000 square feet of space. What this is basically saying is that building can become an apartment building. You're still going to have to comply with parking. They're still going to have to comply with all of the residential standards that we have. But they're allowed to create housing under this. And honestly, we think this is good because we have had to, in the past, allow for this by zoning change, which has had to come to you, or by a use variance, which again, that standard is very difficult to meet, and very expensive for someone to undertake. So we think this is good. Again, like I said, we have imposed safeguards that I think will ensure that this adaptive reuse can happen responsibly. I think it's a good practice because it encourages historic preservation, for example, or preservation in general of an existing structure. And in a city like Providence, I think we have a good track record of seeing this happen. You know, the top line home in Fox Point, I think it's that Lisa Messer Annex that's now a daycare. There's an old building that Brown University owns that's being converted into condos on Benefit Street, which means these things all over the place, and I think it's positive. So that's what that's about. Okay, next. Okay, next, this is this slide and the following slide are related to where we have to advertise for zoning variances and for zoning changes. They changed it from a newspaper of general circulation in the city or town. They changed it to a newspaper of local circulation in the city or town. Some communities have local newspapers. So this would allow advertisements to appear in local newspapers. In fact, in Providence, we have kind of the Providence Journal, so I don't anticipate that anything's going to change here. I think we're still going to be using the Providence Journal for our legal ads. This one is something I need to talk to the clerk about, because what this requires is that for variances, and again, it's going to be the next slide as well, that applies to zoning changes. We're going to have to post this notice on the city's homepage. I need to talk to the law department about what this means. We already posted the notice. It's not on the city's homepage. I have to say, some of these statutes are a little inartfully written, and in a community where you have, a small town where maybe you just have one homepage, we have a sophisticated series of home pages. So how we interpret this is going to be something we work through. The other thing is that for variances, the requirement that it be posted in the clerk's office and one other municipal building, that's fine, because variances are heard over at 444 Westminster. So it's always posted in the clerk's office, and we can post it there. We have a billboard, a bulletin board. That's fine. But for the next slide, which is for adoption of zoning changes, when the hearing is held here, the notice gets posted here in the building where it's going to be, and in the clerk's office, it's one and the same. But now it's saying it's got to be posted in another building. So the clerk and I are going to have to work out a process where we're going to share each other's bulletin boards. I think you're going to have to, make sure that we post this over at our building as well. The other thing is some of this used to require certified mailing. Now it's required to be first-class mailing, but there has to be an affidavit by whoever does the mailing that it's been done. In this case, if the clerk is sending out the mailing, the clerk is going to have to put an affidavit in the file. If the zoning officer is doing it, likewise. And in some cases, we require the applicant to send the mailing. We've already required them to do an affidavit. So we're familiar with that kind of process. So this is all about the notice, how it's posted, where it's posted. That's for us to sort of work through.
But
Yes, sir.
it's still the 200 square feet around, right?
For zoning changes and
Yeah.
zoning variance is still 200. That's right.
And the change, if I'm quite right, we changed it on the charter back then to be digital too, though.
It could be, that could be, that's a good point.
Yeah, review the chart because we did change it when we did to be and digital. No, digital, the information,
To
instead
be
of
included on a website.
to go on the website and,
Oh, yeah, yes. I thank you for that. I'll take a look at the charter. To make sure, yeah, because we, we always have to comply with state law. But there may be other city ordinances or the charter, and so, that's a fair point. I'll take a look at that.
and then can the property owner can send the letters out? If he's doing the,
Not for variances or for zoning changes, which is what we're talking about here. Those are done, variances, the notice is sent out by the zoning officer. Zoning changes, the notice is sent out by the clerk. That's the process.
thank you. Sure.
You're welcome. Go right ahead.
Okay, so slide, this slide, yeah, so, great, okay. This one, there's a whole lot of pages in the ordinance that are dedicated to this theme, but all we're doing is going through and taking out the words like staff or design review committee and replacing it with the word permitting authority. Because the law is clear that we have what are called permitting authorities. A permitting authority is anybody that is issuing a final decision on something. It could be the building official who's issuing a building permit. It could be the zoning official who is issuing an official zoning approval. It could be the city plan commission, the downtown design review committee, or any number of administrative officers who, under the zoning ordinance, are allowed to issue approvals. So this is all about what we call something. The state wants us to be consistent by using this term. So we're just going through our ordinance and making sure that we're naming things properly.
Okay.
Okay.
I do have a question.
Yes, please.
What does this have to do with our comprehensive plan? Will this be also adopted by the comprehensive plan
So
initiative?
yeah, so that's an excellent question. If we were starting from scratch, we would do a comprehensive plan, public engagement process. We would draft a comprehensive plan. We would establish the vision, the policies, strategies to advance our city forward. We would get that adopted, and then we would write all our ordinances and regulations that are intended to carry out that plan. Obviously, we're not starting from scratch. We're always in the middle of planning and zoning and more planning and more zoning. It's an iterative process. We're always trying to keep pace with things that are changing in the community. So these changes are happening at a time when the state is telling us we have to do it. At the same time, we're also in the process of writing a comprehensive plan that will certainly inform future zoning changes. And meanwhile, we need to make sure that as we write this language that the state is telling us we have to write, that we write it in such a way that it's still consistent with our existing comprehensive plan. So the simple answer to your question is that these are independent and separate from this comprehensive planning process that we're going through. But the more complicated answer is that this is all part of a continuum of consistently, reevaluating and revising what we have. we probably wouldn't be doing this right now. If the state hadn't told us we had to. Because we want the comprehensive planning process to go through its full course. Likewise, I would love it if people stopped petitioning council to change the zoning ordinance until after the comprehensive plan is done, but we can't stop that. These are forces that are external to our system, and we have to deal with them as best we can.
So, yeah, yes.
Sure, it actually, to your question, which I find so important and interesting. So what kind of an impact? I mean, I get that the comprehensive plan will have an impact on the zoning changes that we as a city do, because we can change that. But when it comes to the state mandate, is the comprehensive plan gonna be impacted, or is it gonna have any impact? It's a state law, so doesn't that supersede anything that we do anyway?
I think that what the state is. We back up just a little bit to talk about this concept of enabling acts. The state has the zoning authority. In Rhode Island, the state decides through this legislation that it wants to give that authority to the cities and towns. But in giving us that authority, there are strings attached. It tells us how our ordinance has to be structured. It tells us how we're allowed to grant variances. It tells us that there are certain uses that we have to accommodate within our community, such as community residences, plant agriculture, things like that. And now it's going a little bit further in telling us that we can adopt dimensional and use standards, but within certain confines. And the state is kind of putting its thumb on the scales and in indicating that it has a bias towards, clear regulations, clear processes, swift processes, and housing production. So that's why we're seeing things like adaptive reuse and some of the relaxation of dimensional standards in residential zones. So we are still enabled, we are still allowed a great deal of flexibility to tailor our zoning. The state hasn't gone so far as to adopt one zoning ordinance for the whole state, although they could if they wanted to. They're still telling us that we have the ability to chart our own course through our own comprehensive plan and through our own zoning ordinance, but within boundaries. And that's what this is all about. This is them kind of tightening those boundaries a little bit on us. So as we move forward with the comprehensive plan, we certainly are not going to be allowed to say anything in that document or to do anything subsequently in zoning that's going to contradict what the state has demanded. And keep in mind, the state has to approve our comprehensive plan. So if we try to go too far outside of the bounds, example, if we decide to say, we assert complete control over the I-195 band. or there shall be no new state buildings in the city of Providence. They're going to reject our application. So we have to work with the answer.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
and these things are all related. Is this also because the state now have started to build a legislation around housing? And maybe in that area of housing, things have changed over the years. Is this something to do with, it seems to be a lot to do with housing. So he has a lot of bills. I'm thinking about the Speaker of the House, which we are proud of. We're very happy. And so this may be things that was not that tight, treated in a way that we could do what we needed to do in building?
So,
I don't know.
the short answer is, yes. This relates directly to the speaker's package of bills. I don't, there's a housing commission at the state level, there's a zoning commission at the state level. Their work continues, so, you know, this may not be the end of it. I think the good news is that compared to a lot of communities, we've been doing a pretty good job, I think. A lot of this is to try to coax, persuade some of the communities that have been resistant to new development to understand that they need to accommodate development just as much as the urban areas.
And it makes sense because we all on the same page. I mean, I was just rambling something in my head, but I also said, why now? I think we said that, and it makes sense because of our new initiative around pushing for housing and developing and building more housing.
Yes.
So this is a good jump start. I mean, to me, it makes my soul happy to know that we're headed in that direction and we no longer just like, you know, let's do this, put that aside for a minute, but this is a good place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But let's not stop planning and let's not, you know, this comprehensive plan.
Oh, the comprehensive plan is very important for many people, for many reasons.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this, Councilor Harris, but this alone, really, it is a positive towards the creation of more housing. Just with the zone changing, you can see where a lot more units will be built.
Bill,
There are lots out there that today you cannot, today's
Build
standards you're not be
now
able to,
you
you know.
can all.
So by doing the area zoning,
Mhm.
you are going to be able to build more units. You also talk about schools that could be turned into residential churches.
Right, exactly.
So it is.
It's a good place and it's a place to
It's
tell
the- it's
people.
the result of- yeah, exactly, it's the result of the legislative package.
Mhm.
Yes, Councilor Vargas. Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Bob.
We're getting there. We're
Yeah.
very close to the end.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
It's been good so far.
yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I appreciate the patience. So this next one applies to a law that didn't pass in 23, it passed in 22, which relates to the accessory dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units are these, sometimes we'll call them in-law apartments, granny flats. We have to, this is one of the things where the state tells us that, in a single family house, we have to allow for an accessory dwelling unit, for, an elderly or disabled family member. The law has changed. So first of all, it doesn't apply, just to single family houses, it now applies to any type of dwelling, where we have to allow at least one accessory dwelling unit. And also, we can't restrict tenants based on familial relationship or age. So essentially what this is saying is that it's still for the elderly or the disabled, but it can't be restricted to a family member. So this is a way, you know, to produce marginally more housing. I think the state is not done with this yet, because they tried something around accessory dwelling units last session that didn't pass. I think this is going to come back. So stay tuned. But what we're doing here is just something we should have done last year, but we didn't get to it. This is amending based on the current law of accessory dwelling.
Mr. Ace, but do we allow ADU right now?
We do. We allow them, they can only be in the principal structure. So you can carve out a space within an existing house, or you can put an addition on an existing house. So long as you meet all the other zoning requirements to have an accessory dwelling unit. What you can't do in Providence today is have an accessory dwelling unit in an outbuilding. So you can't build out a garage, you can't put a tiny house in your backyard. We'd love to talk to you about that. But I don't think now's the time for that, because again, we're just trying to comply with the state law. But you know, I think that's something we would love to have a conversation about, because it could be a way of producing more housing in a way that's, you know, kind of.
Can you build an ADU in a basement?
You can, yes, you can. You have to comply with all building codes related to, you know, egress and fire and everything like that, but yes, absolutely.
Well, what,
Or in an attic,
Councilor Peterson, please.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around my question, but so these particular things, if we're not restricting the tenant to a familial relationship, they could essentially be rented, right?
they certainly could, yes.
All of this has to obviously abide by whatever our zoning requirements are. Right? So in an R1 zone, if somebody decides to have this, would they be in violation of the zoning and they'd have to go and request a zoning change? Am I saying it wrong? Does that make sense?
Okay. So if you look, I'm sorry. You can do it without a zoning change.
Okay,
You can just get a building permit.
okay,
Okay, and I'm sorry, I have misspoken about the familiar relationship. This law again is very confusing in the way it's written. And I apologize if I didn't use any confusion here. The familial relationship still applies. But there's a little bit of a legal question about this. We've kind of wrangled over this language. What we are saying today is an accessory dwelling unit in an owner-occupied residence. So it's still got to be owner-occupied. I didn't mention that.
okay.
You can only have an ADU in an owner-occupied residence. No longer has to be single family. And it's for family members with disabilities or who are 62 years of age or older. New language that says, or to accommodate other family members. That term is open to interpretation.
Okay.
Who a family member is, under state law has gotten a little murky. So for the time being, the way we are saying it is that you've got to demonstrate that someone is part of your family, and it has to be an owner occupied. If you can meet those criteria, you can get a building permit and you can do it. Again, I would like to have a conversation with you at a later time about whether it makes sense to expand, because the state provides us a floor, not a ceiling. We could go above and beyond this if we want, but I think what you're suggesting, Councilwoman, is that we have to be careful,
Yeah,
because there's always a slippery slope. Today it could be rented. I mean, there's nothing that says you can't rent an accessory dwelling unit to your mother-in-law.
right,
You know,
right.
she might not be happy about that, but you could rent.
My comment and question were more towards if based on non-familial relationships. So in the event that that is, does it become more of an open opportunity for rental? To which case do we have to then change some of our zoning, specifically in specific zones? I don't know what I'm trying to say, but
Yeah,
that was what I was trying to make sure that we didn't have to. Or does it potentially cause considerable concern?
yes. Yes, and I can think of several pitfalls to expanding this that we would have to consider very carefully. Fortunately, this kind of thing has been happening in a lot of places. So there are a lot of good precedents for regulations around accessory dwelling units, so that if and when we decide we want to start having this conversation, we've got a lot of, this kind of thing has been tested for many years in many places, and they've seen the pros and cons of doing this. So, we won't be a pioneer in that respect.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I've got, one or two more slides here.
Councilor Vargas, do you have any other question pertaining to
Yeah.
this page?
Yes, I did have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I? So according to this law, what they're saying that you can build, or you can fix up a basement of a three-family house?
You could, yes.
If you
yes.
live there.
If you live there, it has to be owner occupied.
And you can also build an extension.
You can, as long as zoning allows, as long as you have enough space on your lot and you set back and the height and other requirements.
While it will go up, you get a permit and show how much you spent.
You have to go, you have to get a permit, you have to show that you meet all of the criteria, you have to show that you comply with zoning, and then you can do it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Hazel.
Homestead, all right, now, this is a little bit of an outlier, but this is something we've recognized for some time, and we've gotten, folks in the daycare industry have raised this concern with us, that this, Rhode Island General Law 42-12, is not zoning. It's a different law that relates to, I think, Health and Human Services. It defines, family daycare home, as having up to 12 children. So in a family daycare home, according to this law, you can have up to 12 children. We in Providence, only allow up to 9 children in a family daycare home. And so we only allow up to 8 people receiving care. So our proposal is to be consistent with both the zoning act and this act by increasing that number to 12. Again, that's a proposal.
Okay. Thank you. That was simple.
You don't have daycare.
No. That's okay.
I wonder if there's insurance changes that would need to be acknowledged by the daycare. with regard to increasing
Absolutely, that's a special.
that number, yeah.
Of course.
I think if you get a license to be a family daycare home, you're allowed to have up to 12 based on license.
No more than that.
No more than 12 in a family daycare home, which we allow in most residential zones.
Yeah.
Anything more than that would be a daycare center, which is not a residential housing development.
But our question pertaining to insurance, it would not be homeowners insurance that would.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, this is the last one, and this relates back to that conversation that we had about permitting authority. There is a process in zoning that's called development plan review. And one of these laws that passed kind of blows up development plan review and reconstitutes it and sort of changes the definition of it. For the most part, this is not going to affect the zoning ordinance so much as it's going to affect separate regulations that get adopted by the city plan commission. Development plan review is a process. You have to define what the process is. It has to follow certain rules, certain timeframes, and so forth. But we have to say in the zoning ordinance who does development plan review, and then all of the procedures are going to be listed in these separate regulations adopted by the commission. So we are making that explicit in zoning. We're saying these are the bodies that do development plan review, and then we're striking all of the procedural language in there because we used to be able to just make that procedural stuff up, as long as it was in the zoning ordinance. The law is saying that procedural stuff, you've got to follow our procedures, and it's got to be in the regulations, not in the zoning ordinance. So, there's a lot of language in Article 18 and in Article 19 that we're striking out. And the reason that we're striking it out is because it's going to reappear in these other regulations, but following the rules that the state has told us we have to follow. So that's what this is about. That's my presentation. That gives you hopefully a decent sense of what it is all about. I know it's a lot. I'll say it's been an enormous lift for us to do this. On top of it, we are also rewriting those city plan commission regulations. They also have to be adopted. Fortunately, not by you, but by the commission, again, before January 1st. So, we've got a lot on our plate. We think we've covered everything. There might be a tweak or two that we may want to introduce at the public hearing. We had some comment from the city plan commission last night that might indicate one or two small things. But if that's the case, we'll be sure to let you know what they are. But, you know, I just want to thank you again for your patience and happy taking my questions.
Councilor Vargas, please.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the 45/24/7 period when the family.
Yes.
So let's say I want to do a new house, a two-family house. Can they apply to do the basement at the same time?
Yes. Yes, if it's going to be, it's going to be owner occupied. And if it's for a family member, yes, you can do it. So now, it in effect, will look like a three-family house.
Right.
However, under the law, it's not. It's a two-family house with an accessory unit. Likewise, and this is important for student housing, this doesn't automatically make a single-family house that has restrictions on students into a two-family house that doesn't have restrictions on students. It's still a single-family house, but it has an accessory dwelling unit. An accessory dwelling unit, you have to think of like any other accessory structure, like a garage or a shed or a play structure or a chicken coop or a beehive. These are what we call accessory to the principal use. So, but to your question, yes, that's what the state is saying.
With that, there are many of the new constructions out there,
Yeah, with the basement.
single family, two family duplex, that are putting in the proper height in the
For the
basement.
yeah.
To me, it's ubiquitous, so they have to take it into account that in the future, that will become an additional unit. And they have put in the work, prefab.
I've seen that, yeah. Now, there are building code issues that come with that. This doesn't
Yes.
exempt anybody from the requirements for proper egress or fire suppression or fire alarms or anything like that. So, but yeah, I mean, it's.
But as far as the main structure, it's actually there.
Well, in that, honestly, that's not all that different from a lot of the buildings, you know, the buildings that were built as two families. Always had, you know, staircases to the attics, and I think they were marketed as, you know, buy it as a two family, but have expansion space, and that's exactly what people did over the years. So this is really, it's not terribly different from what we've seen.
Well, Mr. Azer, we certainly appreciate the fact that you took this 30 or 40 pages of this interesting legislative package and summarized them into this easy to understand.
That's right.
Yeah.
Presentation of even Councilor Harris understood.
Good job.
So,
Yeah.
take the time to thank you particularly for putting
Thank you.
time into this and making it so comprehensive. It is well understood. And also you have made yourself available to any questions that we had during this process, understanding that there is a deadline that we must meet. And, there's no going back. So you've always been accessible and available for us, to ask any questions that we have so that we fully understand it. And for you to have extended that to all the committee members is really appreciated. This will certainly is a plus when it comes to increasing density, increasing housing, increasing development. As our population grows, so this will have a tremendous positive impact on our city. So for that, I'm very thankful to the sponsors as well. And any further questions from my committee members?
No.
There were none. I thank you so much. And Madam Clerk, there is no.
Well, we're gonna do a motion to continue this matter.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We still have the public hearing current for. So I'll entertain a motion to continue.
So moved.
Motion is made and second, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Yes, that is so, this item will be continued. So being that there is no further business on the calendar, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
Made and second. all in favor,
Third.
meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We